Good evening, students. Hope you all are doing good and hope your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 22nd of July 2023 and we are here to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, handouts are there in the description section. You can use them to streamline your current affairs preparation. Let us see the table of contents and the topics which are important for today. First topic is India's oil imports from Russia. Second topic is universal basic income, the income guarantee. Third topic is India, a upholder of strategic autonomy. Fourth topic is Archaeological Survey of India. And fifth topic is Directorate General of Civil Aviation. So all the subjects are very important with respect to your UPSC Civil Services examination. Now let us start with the first topic. We all know that recently India has been importing a lot of crude oil from Russia, and the proportion of importation of crude oil from Russia has increased a lot and increased substantially in the past 1 year after the Russia-Ukraine war. So why this is the case, and we'll discuss all the nuances related to it in very much detail. So why it is important? Again, for a GS paper 3 Indian economy perspective and GS paper 2 international relations perspective, this topic becomes important. Now, recent context, we all know that India has been importing the crude oil from Russia, and the proportion of that importation of crude oil has increased substantially over the last 1 year. Now, why this is the case, that we need to understand, that what are the reasons for increase in imports. See, the first reason, or if you have to understand the whole scenario and the whole story behind it, you will have to go to the February of 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine and Russia started war with Ukraine. At that particular point in time, USA, that is United States of America, and European Union, they imposed economic sanctions on Russia. And they said that they will not be importing crude oil from Russia. Now Russia was in flix because Russia was exporting a lot of crude oil to these countries. But when those sanctions came into play, a lot of supply of crude oil was left with Russia. So Russia did a very smart move. Russia basically decreased the crude oil price with respect to the market. So if market price is 10, Russia made it 7. Now, India also played a very smart move here. India starting buying more and more of Russian crude oil. And what India did, that after importing all those crude oil from Russia, India refined that same crude oil and exported that crude oil to European countries, right? So what is India doing here? India is basically acting as a laundromat. And this is being said by many of the Western media houses as well, that India is acting as a laundromat, importing the Russian crude oil, refining it, and then exporting the same crude oil to European Union, because European Union can't directly buy the crude oil from Russia because of the sanctions which they have imposed, right? But they are indirectly using the Russian crude oil only, right? So this is an allegation which is leveled by many Western medias to India also, that India is acting as a laundromat. Now, why the case, why they are allegations, why these allegations are made on India, that I've explained to you, that how India is working as a laundromat. Now, one thing to note here is that interest-based diplomacy comes into picture in this particular scenario. Now, what is interest-based diplomacy? First of all, whenever we are having an interest in a particular country, interest in a particular sphere, particular dimension of that country. For example, in Russian economy, we are having interest in the crude oil right now, right? So we are having, earlier also we are having good relations with Russia. But now this economic relationship between India and Russia has further deepened down. But we are having defense interests. We are having the interests in Indo-Pacific region with respect to USA and European Union and European countries as well, right? So we are aligning with those countries. We are cooperating with those countries on different issue, on different interest. So when we are having diplomacy in the foreign policy of our country with respect to the interests of our country, that is what you call as interest-based diplomacy. And benefits for India, you all know that India has been now importing cheaper crude oil from Russia. So import bill of India has come down, right? Which will ultimately help India in what? Ultimately help India in controlling the current account deficit as well, right? So India's import bill has declined. Now, if I show you this particular graph, you will see that during April of 2022, there was very negligible percentage of India's import of crude oil from Russia. But over the last few months, you will see a very substantial and rapid increase in that, right? So Russia is a country from which we are importing right now more than 50% of our crude oil, right? The number can be even higher right now, right? So which means that we are now highly using and highly dependent on Russia's crude oil. First reason is that it is cheaper. Second reason is that India is using that crude oil, refining it, and India is exporting it as well. So there also India is earning money, right? Now, if we compare it with other countries, let's see this graph. If we compare it with other countries, we will see that OPEC, that is Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, their share in our imports of crude oil has substantially gone down. And Russia's share, which is there in red, it has substantially gone up in the last 1 year, which again shows us that now we are importing more crude oil from Russia than we are importing from other countries, or let's say OPEC countries, right? Now there is one more thing here. Since USA and European countries have imposed sanctions on Russia, so their media and their politicians, they are having very much apprehensions about India's role in this war. Many media houses has even leveled the charges that India is basically funding the Russia-Ukraine war, because India is buying this Russian crude oil. But everything said in these particular media houses is not very true. Why so? Because even though India is importing that Russian crude oil, but India is seeing the interest of its own people, right? Because other countries or OPEC countries, they are giving us crude oil at a very high prices. But when we compare it to Russia, Russia is reducing the prices and giving to us. So obviously, based on our economic interest, we will strategically shift to Russia, right? Because we first of all have to think of our own people. We first of all have to think of our own pocket. So all those allegations, they are not having a very tangible and substantial basis, right? Now, one more thing is that in relation to Russia-India ties, which are very strong since last many decades as well, but right now their ties have even deepened down. Now, one thing which you have to note here is that India has not outrightly condemned Russia for the Russia-Ukraine war. India has obviously said that this war should not be there. War is never the solution. We must sit down, talk peacefully, talk amicably, and reach to a resolution. So India has not condemned Russia's actions, but India has said that war should be over, because this is not a century of war, right? So in relation to all those things, I guess India's oil import from Russia, its reasons, its importance for India, and how in the global scenario India is faring with respect to oil imports from Russia, all this is very clear to all of you. Now moving on to the second topic, it is related to universal basic income. Now, why this is in news is because Rajasthan government has recently provided minimum income guarantee policy to their people, whereby they'll be providing minimum guaranteed income to its population, that is people of Rajasthan. Now, in relation to that, your universal basic income topic becomes very important, and it becomes highlighted as well. So it is related to GS paper 3, Indian economy portion, and also if you see, it is related to your GS paper 2 as well. That is your social justice, which includes your poverty as well, inequality as well, right? Now coming to the topic of universal basic income. Current context we all know, but what we have to understand is that what is this universal basic income? See, universal basic income is a form of social security which involves cash payments or bank account transfers to anyone who's not having work or who's not having means of livelihood without any conditionalities. That is universally, for example, UBI, Universal Basic Income, is launched in a country like India. So every person in India would be given, let's suppose, 1,500 or 2,000 rupees per month. A minimum guaranteed income they will be provided without any consideration or without any conditionalities, right? So no conditions will be kept, but 1,500 rupees or 2,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, whatever the amount is fixed, will be provided to all irrespective of any condition. That kind of payment or that kind of income is known as a universal basic income. That is a basic income which we are giving to the people so that they can have basic standard of living. That is, they can afford food, shelter, clothing, and the basic necessities. So I hope the concept of universal basic income is very, very clear to all of you. Now, what are the points which are in favor of this universal basic income? Now, before understanding these points as well, let us see some data. See, number of poor people in our country, it has hovered around 269 million people if we compare it with 2011 and 2012 data, right? Now, let's suppose we are just giving 1,500 rupees a month to these 200 million people, right? So all in all, 3.6 lakh crore will be the cost to the Indian government, right? So this will be the cost to our exchequer. Also, if you see that if we have a targeted approach as well, right? If we see the socioeconomic caste census data, and if we targetedly give money or basic income to those who are under poverty or who are below poverty line and those who are basically very much deprived as well. So those who are deprived and those who are automatically included in the socioeconomic caste census, that is those who are not having rooftops in their household, those who are not having any member who is working, any member who is earning a livelihood, they are living in very, very acute poverty. If only those people are given universal basic income, then also the cost would be 1.6 lakh crore. So if you see that providing universal basic income is not that easy, the cost of it becomes very, very high because the first reason is that population of India is very, very high. Second reason is that the number of poor people, those who are in absolute poverty, that number of people is also very, very high. So obviously the cost to the exchequer would be humongous. Right? Now, in this context, let us study what are the points in favor and what are the points against this universal basic income. See, points in favor. First of all, it will help us to tackle poverty, that we all know. If it's helping in tackling poverty, ultimately it will help in reducing the inequality level. That is the wealth inequality, income inequality. Also, if inequality is reduced and poverty is reduced, all those people who will come above the poverty line, they will be included in the financial system. So financial inclusion will also be ensured with this universal basic income. Now, if financial inclusion is ensured, that is, they are included in the financial system, so they will be using that money as well. And where will they be using that money? They will be consuming goods, they will be consuming services. So overall consumer spending in the economy is going to rise, which will ultimately increase our GDP growth as well. So that is also one of the point in favor. Plus it will reduce the leakage, because right now we are having so many schemes, so many subsidies, in that many leakages are there. But if we provide direct benefit transfer, UBI, Universal Basic Income, in the form of direct transfer to people's accounts, then leakages will also be reduced. So these are the points in favor. But what are the points against? See, first and the foremost point is the cost to the exchequer. That is, Indian government, ultimately, indirectly, we only have to pay for that, right? So the Indian government will have to incur a humongous cost if this universal basic income is launched, right? Plus, we are having a very high fiscal deficit as well. which is not being controlled, which is not in control. And especially if we talk about the state governments, their fiscal deficit is also very, very high. Right? So that is also a problem, that if we spend more and more, then fiscal deficit will again increase. Third is conspicuous consumption. Right? Conspicuous consumption means that consuming on things or spending on things which are not very, very necessary. So according to many scholars, if we provide universal basic income to every citizen, to every poor, there might be a chance that they will be using that money on liquor, or they would be using that money on cigarettes, or they will be using that money for drugs, right? So those kind of illicit substances, prohibited substances, if they spend money on, that is, they are not spending money on the basic needs. They will not be building their house with that money. They will not be having proper meals with that money. So that apprehension is also there with a lot many scholars, and also disincentive to work. Now, many scholars say that if we provide guaranteed income to people, it will disincentivize them to work, because they would know that without working also I'm getting money. So why to work? Just get the money, eat food, and don't work, and be in leisure. So disincentivized to work is also a point against this universal basic income. Now, what are the various examples which we have seen throughout the world? See, Finland launched some kind of universal basic income, not universally, but targeting to the poor people of their country, right? So that was somewhat successful. Then in Ontario, Canada, also some kind of universal basic income at a very, very small level, right? At very, very state level or district level, it was launched. And in Barcelona, Spain as well, right? This kind of some kind of experimentation related to universal basic income was done. But all in all, if I tell you that currently there is no country in the world who has launched a universal basic income pan-countrywide, right? Currently there is no such country, right? But what should be the way forward? That is what we need to know. That it is okay that we need to provide UBI, universal basic income. That is given that if we want to reduce inequality, reduce poverty, poor people need to be given assistance by the government, right? But it should be well thought, well planned, well structured, and well implemented as well. If all these things are ensured, ultimately then we will be able to ensure that poverty is actually reduced. Inequality is actually reduced because of this universal basic income. So a lot many factors, a lot many things needs to be kept in mind in order to ensure this, right? So I hope this topic is also clear to all of you. Now coming to the third topic, India as an upholder of strategic autonomy. Now for a GS paper 2, international relations, this topic becomes very, very important. Now first of all, we need to know what is a strategic autonomy. We always hear the word that India is having strategic autonomy, but what does that word mean? See, strategic autonomy means that ability of a nation to take stands, to take decisions without being impacted by any foreign power, and basically taking the decisions on its own terms, on its own interests, that is based on its own interests. Not getting influenced, not getting coerced by a foreign power, right? Be it with your friends, be it with your enemies. But if we are not getting influenced by any other country, and we are having a foreign policy of our own, and we are using our own mind, our own ideas, and taking actions which suits us, that particular kind of stance is what you call as strategic autonomy. That is, we are having autonomy to take strategic international decisions. So I hope that meaning is very, very clear to all of you. Now, strategic autonomy in India has basically evolved into various dimensions and segments. First of all, we had a non-alignment movement when USSR and USA was having a Cold War. So during that time, we were following the policy of non-alignment. After that, it was the policy of regional assertion, because after the 1971 war and after the 1971 treaty with Russia, we basically enhanced our relationship with the Russian economy, with the USSR. So once we increased our cooperation with that country, we basically were asserting ourselves in the Asian region. So that was also a period of strategic autonomy. But after 1991 LPG reforms, that is liberalization, privatization, globalization reforms, India focused on the path of proper strategic autonomy. That is, India started taking decisions based on its own interests, obviously taking other things into consideration, making a calculated decision, but primary focus was on our own interest. And after 2005 or so, or after basically the global financial crisis, let's say, the world converted into a multipolar world, where there was no hegemony of one particular country or two particular country, but there was a group of countries which is powerful, which is dominant, which is having substantial say in the world politics. And this is what is the current scenario, that currently a multipolar world is there and India is having its strategic autonomy. Right? Now let us see in what many cases, in what instances India showcased its strategic autonomy. Now you all know about the de-hyphenation policy which India is having in relation to Palestine and Israel. Now this de-hyphenation policy states that our stance on Palestine is very much not linked and very much different to our relations with the Israel. And our relations with Israel will not be determined or will not be impacted by our stance on Palestinian freedom. Right? So that de-hyphenation policy also shows that we are not aligning to a particular party, we are having our own interest, we are supporting Palestine, plus also we are having good relationship with Israel. So de-hyphenation policy showcases strategic autonomy for our country. Then development of minilaterals. Now the minilaterals, let's say Quad, that is the quadrilateral grouping between US, India, Australia, Japan. This Quad grouping, then I2U2, that is India, Israel, UAE, USA. So these kind of minilaterals, that is 3 to 4 countries coming together, forming an alliance or forming basically a group of cooperation. So these kind of cooperation or minilaterals, when they are formed, India becomes a part of it based on its own interest, based on its own terms, which again says that India is having a strategic autonomy. And it again showcases this. Now, during the time of RCP negotiations, that is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, India outrightly pulled back from RCP, which again shows that we are not very much dependent, that if a comprehensive economic partnership is there in the South Asian economy, if our apprehensions are not cleared off, we will back out from it. We will not be a part of it, right? So this also showcases our strategic autonomy. Then counterbalance between US and Russia. Now, right now, we all know when Russia-Ukraine war is going, and we heard in this previous topic as well, that we are importing crude oil from Russia. But our Prime Minister is visiting USA as well, and we are having defense deals, drone deals at the other hand. So we are counterbalancing between USA and Russia, which again states that our relationship with one country does not impact our relation with the other country. We are having independent bilateral relations with each countries, right? So we are having strategic autonomy, right? We are counterbalancing between US and Russia. Now this S-400 defense deal which we had with Russia, also we were importing crude oil, right? So we were doing all those things even when USA has imposed sanctions on Russia. Bypassing those sanctions, we are basically doing these deals and importing all those crude oil from Russia. Also one more thing, that our focus on the global south, because India is having the G20 presidency, so because of our focus in the global south as well, the southern countries of the globe, which are considered less developed, which are considered underdeveloped, poor countries, we are like developing their voice as well. And we are acting like a voice, and we had this Voice of Global South Summit as well, right? In that summit also, we asked the people, or we asked the representatives of the Global South to raise their apprehension so we can take up in the G20 presidency as well. So our support to the Global South again indicates that we are taking decisions on our interests, on what we think is right, what we think is wrong. Our policy is not impacted by some other country. It is not dictated by some other country, right? It is based on our particular strategic interests, right? So this Global South support also showcases strategic autonomy. Then France strategic autonomy. Now we all know that Indian Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, visited France recently, and we had defense deals also, and we celebrated 25 years of strategic partnership with France, right? So France is also having some kind of strategic autonomy in its bilateral relations, in its multilateral relations, and its foreign policy as well. Basically, France is recently trying to reduce the influence of US in its foreign policy. That is why, if you remember, that during the nuclear test as well, France was the only major Western country which did not condemn India during those nuclear tests. Let alone the sanctions, it did not even condemn India during that particular point in time, when every Western country condemned India. And if we talk about the first nuclear test we did, which were unsuccessful, but we did those tests, during that time, France was basically congratulating India that, okay, you are progressing to greater limits, right? And France is also supporting us for the UNSC membership, right? So France is taking decisions based on its own interests. Right, France is making actions, or France is making decisions based on their own autonomous interest, not impacted by Western countries, not impacted by European other countries. Although France is a member of NATO, France is having a particular power there, France is having a particular duty over there, but still France is managing to maintain its strategic autonomy and do not let its foreign policy get dictated by the US or other Western powers, right? Requirement in the Indo-Pacific. Now, why I have written this requirement in Indo-Pacific is that, okay, India is strategically autonomous and India is having strategic autonomy. But why is it very important right now? Because our strategic autonomy will develop our influence and will help us to counter the influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region, right? Because we will be taking actions which will be suiting our needs, our aspirations, and we will be directly countering China in the Indo-Pacific region. And we will be ensuring our maritime security as well, our border security as well, and we will be ensuring a free, inclusive, and open Indo-Pacific region, right? Which France is against of, right? So because of all these things, there is a requirement of India being strategically autonomous in order to ensure free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. I hope this India as an upholder of strategic autonomy, again, it is very, very clear to all of you. Now, talking about the fourth topic, it is related to Archaeological Survey of India. Now, in relation to that, why it is in news, first of all, we have to understand this. See, a Varanasi court has recently ordered this ASI, that is Archaeological Survey of India, to survey Gyanvapi. And it has directed ASI to find out that this Gyanvapi was built over a temple or not. So this ASI will now be conducting a survey. So for our prelims perspective, this Archaeological Survey of India becomes important organization. Again, our GS2 perspective, government policies and interventions for development of various sectors, plus the regulatory bodies and various other bodies which are there in our basically political institution, which are there in the country. So because of that, this ASI becomes important. Now let us understand what is this Archaeological Survey of India. Current context I have already given to you. Archaeological Survey of India is basically a premier organization under your Ministry of Culture. And its main role is to promote and to conduct archaeological research and protection of cultural heritage in our country. To conduct archaeological research and to protect and to promote cultural heritage of our nation. This ASI was particularly formed in the year 1861 by Alexander Cunningham. Now, the main role of this ASI is to maintain ancient monuments, to maintain archaeological sites as well, and the remains of national importance, right? All this is the prime concern of the ASI. And also it regulates the archaeological activities of the entire country under the provisions of which act? Under the provisions of Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites Remains Act of your 1958. So this is also a major role of this ASI to implement the provisions under this Ancient Monument Archaeological Sites Remains Act of 1958. And it also regulates your Antiquities and Art Treasure Act of your 1972. So these two acts, this ASI is regulating. Now let us study a bit more detail about this function and activities of your Archaeological Survey of India. First is that it conducts archaeological survey, archaeological excavations and operations in India. Second is it also protects and maintains historical sites, some monuments as well, and also some national remnants which needs to be kept preserved. So it is also maintaining archaeological sites, and also it is conserving and preserving these basically archaeological sites, monuments from attacks as well. For example, a chemical attack, or let's say the natural depreciation of these areas, right? So this ASI is having a role to conserve and protect these archaeological areas. So safety wise also it is having a role to play in this. Also it conducts various architectural and archaeological surveys. That is also very important role of this ASI. And it also conducts archaeological research, epigraphical research, numismatics research, and it also establishes on-site museums as well. So various on-site museums have been set up by this ASI, and education related purposes and publication related to archaeology, related to particularly museumology. Under these topics, ASI is also promoting education awareness, and it is also publicating, or it's also involved in the publication of various journals, various books, various research papers on these archaeological principles and archaeological facts. So I hope this ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, its functions, its role, its importance is very, very clear to all of you. Now let us move to the last topic of today, that is your DGCA, that is Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Now why this is in news? Again, DGCA has allowed recently the Go First Airlines to restart flight with certain conditions. So they have kept certain conditions, that is they need to have a mock flight or some other conditions are there, under which this DGCA has allowed Go First Airlines to restart their flight operations. Now what is this DGCA? And what are its roles, what are its functions in the civil aviation? We will be studying them in detail. Again, for a GS Paper 3 Indian economy perspective and GS 3 infrastructure perspective, this DGCA becomes important. Also the regulatory bodies in our GS Paper 2, for that as well, it is important. Now current context we already know, but we have to know what is basically DGCA, Directorate General of Civil Aviation. It is basically an attached office to your Ministry of Civil Aviation under the Government of India. So it's an attached office, plus it's a regulatory body which regulates the civil aviation sector of our country. So their main aim is to regulate air transport services to, from and within India. And also it deals with safety issues as well. So it is responsible for enforcing civil air and civil air regulations in our country. Also, it is responsible for air safety, right, and airworthiness standards. So DGCA is responsible for all these things. Now, what you have to understand is that it is also a coordinating agency on the basis of regulatory functions with your ICAO, that is International Civil Aviation Organization. So it is also collaborating with ICAO in various respects. And it is headed by whom? It is headed by your Director General of Civil Aviation. So DGCA is basically headed by Director General of Civil Aviation. Now, what are its functions? Let's see in detail. First, to manage the air transport, that is a very important function. To license the personnel who are working there. To train the flying cadets. Also to ensure sports. To ensure a certification of aircrafts, a very, very major function of DGCA. Continuing airworthiness, again important feature. Aircraft operations, to ensure that aircraft operations are very, very smooth and without any particular delays or without any particular emergencies. Aerodomes and ground aids, it's controlling that as well. Drones also, air navigation services also, all these things DGCA is having a control on. It's having a legal affairs branch as well, which is related to the legal affairs related to civil aviation. Also state safety programs they are having. Then internationally they are cooperating with ICAO, we already discussed. Then investigation and prevention of various hazards, various accidents in civil aviation. Then surveillance and enforcement, that is also very, very important issue, that is to surveil any breach and to enforce any regulation in the civil aviation sector, to ensure information technology is being used widely in the civil aviation sector. That is also the function of DGCA. To ensure general administration and general training of the airline staff as well. This is also a function of DGCA. So in order to ensure overall quality of travel by passengers, to ensure safety, to ensure airworthiness, and also to regulate the civil aviation sector in general, all these functions are performed by your Director General or Directorate General of your civil aviation. I hope all these points are very, very clear to all of you. So this is the end of today's lecture. I hope you understood all the points, all the topics. All the very best for your preparation. Have a good day.